Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cosumnes River College's CRC Music in the Studio. I'm Professor Omari Tao, Professor of Vocal Music here, and I am thrilled to have you back this week as we welcome our special guest, Chase Spruill, to the program. Chase Spruill has gained an international reputation as a soloist and recording artist promoting contemporary classical music. He is more widely known for his collaborations with minimalist masters such as composers Philip Glass and Michael Nyman. BBC Music has called Spruill an engaging and convincing advocate who plays with great spirit and a great sense of presence. His most recent album, A Common Time, was released in January of this year and is a collaboration with Philip Glass, exploring themes about grief and solace through new music for solo violin. The French Classical Magazine DIAPASON hailed the album as having a poignant intensity, while Composer Magazine raved the whole album is a wonderful listening experience. From 2012 to 2017, he was a core faculty member with the nationally celebrated not-for-profit organization Community Music Works in Providence, Rhode Island, which Alex Ross of The New Yorker hailed as being a revolutionary organization in which the distinction between performing and teaching disappears, working with young people in the underserved communities of the West End and South Side of Providence to create formative experiences writing and performing contemporary music. He became a visiting professor of violin and orchestral studies at Wheaton College in Massachusetts from 2015 to 2017, where he extended his work engaging students in ongoing experiments to explore possible intersections between music education and social justice. He is an alumnus of Sacramento State University, where he studied with violinist Anna Presler. And before I welcome him to the screen, let's take a listen to his exquisite performance of Epilogue for Solo Violin by Philip Glass. This is Chase Spruill. Wow, wow, wow. So gorgeous. Such an amazing introduction to this incredible artist. Please help me welcome Chase Spruill, violinist, to our program. Welcome, Chase. Let's get you on the screen.
Hello, hi.
Hello.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's really great to get to be with you guys this
Oh
afternoon.
my goodness, it's so spectacular. Chase, I've had the pleasure of knowing you now for I don't know, over the years, I guess, a couple of few years here
Oh,
now.
yeah, that's right. Let's not
Um,
date ourselves. So it's
let's not. But it's really great, and I just have to say, it's always wonderful when you get a chance to, someone, you get a chance to work with them a little bit here and there. But getting just to sit back and just to enjoy your art is so wonderful and awe-inspiring. So tell us a little bit about you and how you came to be. And then I'll come back and circle back to this piece that you just shared with us. So I always say, who are you? Where are you from? What's going on?
where are you from? No, that's a great question. In the beginning, no. So I mean, I come from a family of five, where I have two older sisters, and both of my parents were in the military. They were in the Air Force.
Mm.
So we traveled around a lot when I was younger, and obviously my sisters traveled with my parents more than I did. But I grew up for a time in England, and I was right around, probably, I think I was 8 years old when we came to the States, 8 or 9 years old when we came to the States, and landed in California for my dad's last assignment at Travis Air Force Base. And that's basically how we ended up taking residence in Fairfield, California, not too far away. And then eventually Vacaville, which would become sort of my more long-time home, and obviously where I am right now. And it was right about that time where I came back to California that we were learning about music in public schools, and they were going to offer opportunities for people to learn music in public schools,
Mm-hmm.
which was maybe it was an age thing. I don't remember if it was offered when we were over in Europe, but it was offered here now, and it was super exciting to me. So my parents were 100% behind that. Nobody in my family plays an instrument that I know of. But we were listening to the radio all the time, singing songs together all the time. And then it was up to me to go out and figure out maybe how to try to do some of that with a year of really scratchy violin playing.
Got to start somewhere.
It's true. Well, I grew up, you know, with childhood asthma and all this. So I knew that I wasn't going to be doing like little league football or baseball. And I even tried to foolishly step into the band room, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll try trumpet. Maybe that's the thing. Uh,
Sure. With
5 seconds later, when we found out that it wasn't, that was when I went to the violin. And we had a great year of, being in fifth grade playing violin. And then I got hurt. I got pushed down during a basketball game.
Oh.
Not even playing basketball, unfortunately. I was tying my shoes on the sideline. I know. I wanted to make sure I included that, because people are like, wait a second, I thought you said you're wearing a sports guy. That's right. I was tying my shoes when it happened. Uh, but it's something I can laugh about now, but it was a very serious injury. I was in and out of surgeries for 2 years. I was taken out of school, right at, basically only a year of having some music classes under my belt. I was bedridden and wheelchair bound for a number of months. I went
Wow.
through numerous stints of rehab. And the thing that I had to sort of keep me company during all of that was my violin, because by the time I could get into a wheelchair, our house, we had 2 stories in our house. My room and one of my sister's rooms was up on the second story. So, once we got that initial surgery out the way, I was just up there.
Hmm.
So it was like, obviously my family was coming around, friends would come around to visit. But other than like having neighbors come over to lift me down the stairs and stuff to help get me into a car to go to a doctor's appointment, there was not much else to do. So it was my parents figured out how to get the arms off of my wheelchair. And by the time I could sort of sit comfortably with my leg elevated, I would just have my violin with me pretty much at all times. And
That is fascinating.
I'm glad you think so, because at the time it just seemed like a helpful distraction.
Huh.
But I was watching a lot of television. It was my first time getting a TV in my room. So I was watching a lot of TV and like learning theme songs and listening to the radio and trying to pluck along and figure out how things were supposed to sound. But I think really without knowing it, that's where my love of playing violin and being a musician was really developing then. So that's really where it all started.
So it's kind of like you lost access to one limb or other limbs, and you developed a relationship with a completely new one, and able to use it to sort of express yourself as much as you could without being traveling around. I did not know this part of your story, which is fascinating. It's amazing, the notion that, I mean, we always use these ideas, these axes, music finds you, you don't find music, etc. But sometimes we go, if it had not been for X, Y, and Z, I don't know if we would have the kind of relationship we have with music that we do now.
You're right.
Art making.
You're right. I think it happens a lot for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And I believe that a common thread for most people is that you're not going to see it. You're not going to understand it or perceive that the necessary thing that's happening to you in the moment is happening to you. 10 years down the line, or like 2030, you're going to be like exactly what you said. If it hadn't been for this moment, I wouldn't be doing ABC.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I quote naysayers like straight up. I'm like, I remember when something was said back in the 80s of da 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 on this one little moment when they passed by me, and it stuck with me. It was so big. And I was like, that was a monumental moment. Yours is physically, like, it took up so much time. You said 2 years? Is that how long?
2 years. 2 years. Yeah.
Ooh, fascinating. And I wonder, I mean, we can talk about this more in terms of, the stylistic aspect, the reason why you're drawn to certain kinds of music. But can you tell us a little bit about the piece that you shared with us at the beginning, this epilogue? Can you tell us about the composer, for our audience who doesn't know who Philip Glass is, and what it was about? It seemed to be about, it was a very emotional kind of piece. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, so the music that we heard was written by the American composer Philip Glass. Philip Glass has had this huge spanning career, working in musical theater, opera, writing symphonies, chamber music, collaborating with pop stars from like Iggy Pop and David Bowie. He's had this amazingly diverse career, and that piece of music that we heard was actually from a film starring Clive Owen, which is called Bent. That movie was about, it was set in a concentration camp, and it was about men who were gay having this troublesome relationship between their identity and the circumstances of their lives, and trying to figure out how to negotiate that during this horrific period in our history. When we thought to play that piece, this was right in the middle of the basically the shelter in place part of the pandemic. And there were a lot of us in the circle of Philip Glass who were having conversations like we're having right now. And we were trying to figure out where we were, what we were doing, what was happening. And right in the middle of that, the terrible incident of the murder of George Floyd happened. So if tensions weren't already boiling over, it was really about to drop off then. And if we didn't somehow have enough to talk about at the moment, we certainly did now. But what stood out to me in having conversations with my friends and colleagues at that time was so many people had so many interesting things to say and so many profound things and emotional things. I could imagine from other points of view that they might look at me, a Black man in America, and they would think, well, what do you think about this? I remember feeling like, oh yeah, I should have something to say about this. But I was caught in a very interesting place. And I think that this was a shared thing between many, many people, maybe not all. But I was as horrified as everyone. I was as shocked as everyone, devastated, uncomfortable. But I was also not surprised. And, I think that people were waiting for me, friends were waiting for me to join in on their shock and trauma and devastation. And I'm like, you're 20 years late to the party for me, and hundreds of years late to the party for our parents and our grandparents who've been talking about this for a while. So frankly, I didn't have anything to say, and I didn't feel like I was in a space to offer comfort to anyone. I was there to listen. I could offer some perspectives, but I did not know how to rub your shoulders and make you feel okay about what this was. I didn't know what this was. So in the conversations, that I had with Richard, my friend Richard Guerin, who runs Philip's record label, Orange Mountain Music, this was one of the conversations that we had. Richard is one of the best people that I know, who is always thinking like 10 yards ahead of at least myself. And this was one of the things that I told him, just like, I don't have anything to say. I have a lot of feelings, but nothing that I think would be impactful or helpful. And Richard did something interesting in that he just instinctually was like, have you ever seen the movie Bent? I was like, no, I haven't heard. And he's like, well, Philip wrote the score for that film, and it's so unusual. It ends with this kind of violin solo that's never like really out there, and we haven't really done anything with it. What would you think about playing that? It's like, for what? It's like, just for yourself. Like, so, Philip and everybody, they sent me a score with some minor revisions. And when I started playing it for myself, just at home, like everybody else, in the quiet, I suddenly felt like I did have something to say. And it was a simple kind of a piece, but there was a lot in there, a lot to pour in there. Like when I look at notes on the page, one of the first things that I do in my brain as a violinist is I start to imagine physically how that piece might work for me. And looking at these simple phrases, these simple notes, I could feel almost like listening to Mahalia Jackson or Aretha Franklin. I could feel kind of like gospel slides and that sort of heavy, hefty, pain, emotive sound. And I went back and I was saying, like, you've got to let me play this. They're like, yes, please, let's do it. Let's record it. This is something totally new. We want to do this as not a demonstration, not a show, not a protest, but just to acknowledge that there are people out there, a lot like me in that scenario, who had tons of feelings, but maybe no place to put them.
Right. I mean, I remember approaching you about a project. We're still going to work on this project during this time, because I too felt the same sort of way. It's kind of, I don't know who said it, but it's sort of, when words fail, music speaks. And it's kind of that notion. I'm right there with you. I didn't know what to say. I knew what I could possibly do. I knew what some things to, we could make some music happen. It's da 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 da. But how wonderful it is. I need to know this person who introduced that piece to you. I was familiar with the film. I remember that. And I remember as our illustrious dean has mentioned, it's actually from a play. I remember that. I think it was in the 90s when that film came out, something like that, early 90s. I remember that. I don't remember the music, at least off the top of my head. I mean, if it was the early 90s, then I must have known, oh, Philip Glass, big name. But I don't remember that following. I remember the feeling of the film. So that means that the music did have an impact on me. I didn't put two and two together. But definitely there's a feeling that the film leaves you with. You know something about the story. You have this dread about the characters and their fate, and there's hope, and there's also these kinds of different things. So it seems kind of perfect when we think about this mucky time that we're living in and having to deal with the murder, this broadcast on television, and us having to cope with it. And it's an interesting take because I think most people who are familiar with Philip Glass's music imagine these sort of arpeggios and repetitiveness and fast-paced sort of generally fast-paced rhythmic structures. Can you talk about how this differs a little bit from other work, if it does, or we just haven't heard enough of his music to put that in perspective?
No, I think that's an interesting question because, it is, if you really study Philip's work, the breadth of his work, a lot of the stereotypical things you might imagine about, like you said, like the music and repetitive structures, these ostinatos and arpeggiated figures, and those things are all there, and they are still elements of his music that he writes. But if you really track him from the late 60s clear into the mid 80s and early 90s, you do see him, like his music itself, it's sort of a meta thing. You do see him evolve into this romantic, melodic sort of sound. And everything else that's back there before, all those arpeggiations and those great rhythms that we all recognize, and the back and forth eighth notes, they're all there. But then you do see him start to cast these spellbinding melodies, like in the opera from Satyagraha.
So amazing.
The whole thing is like when Martin Luther King Jr. comes at the end of the play and Gandhi is singing his social justice song. The whole idea is about this ascension. It's just very melodic and wonderful. So I think there's a lot of similarity there. And I think that at heart, Philip, as the person, is kind of a romantic. He has a lot of hope for the world and has a lot of ideas and ideal visions about how things could be while accepting how things are. So when we hear this kind of music, it doesn't shock me at all. Particularly for some of his film scores are very romantic, like the music from The Hours with Nicole Kidman and Meryl Streep and Julianne Moore.
Right.
It's like heart-wrenching melodic stuff. People are wading into the water and drowning themselves with rocks.
So you've had a relationship with Philip Glass for how long?
Well, so I was stopping myself when I was talking about tracking Philip's work because my relationship to Philip Glass goes way back before I got to know him and work with him. It started when I was in that wheelchair. That's at the same time I was learning violin. That was the same time I was falling in love with scary movies. So, all right. So here's the side story, right? There's the
side story. Good.
There is little Chase learning violin, pluck, pluck, pluck. That's great. But then there's Chase at 11:30 at night discovering Showtime and Cinemax, and they're like, they were starting to show like Roger Corman's scary movies and just things I had never seen. I was the original Hellraiser movies, all these Clive Barker.
How old were you? My goodness.
Right. Yeah. So I was about 12. That's
Okay.
but that's yeah, that's nothing compared to these kids today. You have 7-year-olds talking about things that frighten me. But you know, being 12 at this time, Clive Barker's Candyman was just sort of starting to make its way onto television. And this was before I knew Philip's name. I was watching this movie Candyman, which was really impactful because I was really used to the Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, and then the terrible B movies like The Blob and that sort of stuff. So Candyman comes along and it's 11:30 at night. I'm turning down the volume so my parents can't hear. And somebody says, the bees are terrifying.
The bees, exactly, that's right.
You're absolutely right. And I'm watching this movie that I'm expecting to be a slasher film. And I'm waiting for it to turn into a slasher film, waiting for it to turn into a slasher film. And instead, what I'm seeing is this woman played by Virginia Madsen, who's got no business going into neighborhoods in Chicago, asking Black people about the terrible things that have gone on in their lives. And I'm like, who do you think what's she doing? What is she doing?
That's a horror story right there. That's the premise.
That's exactly right. And then the willing people start telling her these terrible stories born out of this terrible violence about this figure of Candyman, the specter of Candyman, you know, amidst drug deals gone horribly wrong and gang violence. And I thought that itself was fascinating until they started getting into the legend stuff of Candyman. And the movie's ramping up. And I didn't realize that I was falling in love in the background with this sort of hypnotic music that is like piano, organ.
I remember the organ part. That's what I was like, what's happening here? Yeah.
I think most people, to be honest, I think most people were, if they were fans of that movie, the music stands out for them. Like the first opening shot is above Chicago, and it's shot from above as they're following the freeway and the cityscape and the cars. And it's just an organ and a choir. And I hadn't heard that before, not in a movie.
And juxtaposed against Chicago in this place. It's what an odd and really cool position. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was anytime that movie came on, I would just sit next to the TV and as much as I could get away with it and listen to the music, and I would pull out my violin and pluck the music along and try to figure out the notes. And that's when I finally was like, oh, who wrote this music? Philip Glass. So around the time where other kids were probably learning Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and getting ready for their 6th grade, 7th grade showcase, I was like, can somebody please, apparently he wrote an opera called Einstein on the Beach. Could somebody go find that music for me? So that was how I got started.
Amazing.
But we didn't officially meet until 2012. That was when I went out to the East Coast and I was working with this organization, Community Music Works, near and dear to my heart. And I had been fully obsessed with Candyman for years by that point, picking and choosing who I would tell about that. And I can't remember, I think it was before I left California, I said to my parents amidst the moving boxes, it's like, yeah, I wonder how close Rhode Island is to New York. That would be so wild to be able to meet Philip Glass. It would be so interesting to be able to like play that music from Candyman. Has anybody done it anywhere? And my parents were so over me talking about Candyman, and I didn't know I was watching those scary movies and stuff. So, but I remember there was just one sleepless night. My son was like 1 year old at that point, and I was just up on my laptop, and I had the thought about Michael Reisman, who is the longtime director of the Philip Glass Ensemble. And, from a lot of the recordings and stuff that I saw, I knew he was really heavily involved with Philip's music, almost like the right-hand person with Philip. I knew he was the director of the Philip Glass Ensemble, which is their leading performance-based group that Philip plays in and Michael leads, and they all do like the seminal works like Music in 12 Parts and Einstein on the Beach and everything. Koyanis Katsi, the Katsi trilogy.
Yes.
And something rose up inside of me. It was like, you know, you should write him. You should write him and say something about Candyman, something about wanting to be involved in this music. And so it was a total shot in the dark. I emailed him out of the blue and I just let him know I'm a huge fan, not just of Philip, but of you. When I think of the sound of Philip Glass, I think of you being the one that's playing it. That said, what's going on with the music of Candyman? How come? Because it was barely like released and nobody played it anywhere. It wasn't available in any way that I knew. And sent it out into the void. It just so happened I was going to do a premiere with Kronos Quartet at the time. And Kronos Quartet has had a long relationship with Philip Glass, including string quartets and everything, and Dracula, the soundtrack for Philip's Dracula score. So unbeknownst to me, there was some really perfect timing happening. I thought, great, I sent this email out, nothing's gonna happen, fine, whatever. Apparently, this is how the story was told to me. Michael Reisman tells Philip calls Kronos Quartet, who's working with me at the time, or I'm working with them. And Philip says, yeah, I asked them about you. And I said to David Harrington, is this guy real? And David said, oh, Chase? Oh yeah, he's for real. And I was like, yes! Yes! Like, you know, to this day, I don't know if that means, yes, he's a real person.
Or he's the real
like, legit. I'm gonna choose for my fantasy life. I'm choosing this version. Like, yeah, he's got it. And he gave permission for Michael to sort of write back, and he was like, "Okay, yeah, let's meet. Let's figure out what you want to do." And I told him exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to have a suite for violin and piano, encapsulating these major themes that I thought would be really great on a concert stage. So I was just ready to bullet point what I thought would work. And they agreed to it. And before he could get off the phone, I was like, also, why don't we just play it together? And he goes, where? Like,
oh,
I figure out some places, maybe we do a tour. He's like, okay, sure, sounds good.
I'm hoping that the students are listening to this. Are you listening to this? We always talk about this. We have Professor Kurt Erickson in the chat as well here watching. And Kurt is a composer and active out there. And we talk about living composers and our access to them. The fact, yes, he says hi. The fact that they are just right here. Ask a question. You never know what's going on with them. No is an answer. It is. But so is yes. So is maybe. So how fascinating is it that we have this chance to even just to access them? The fact that they responded to your email is already like, oh my gosh, they know I exist, right? It's like that's a gift. And then to go the extra mile, right? Because the answer could be, I'm sorry, I'm not available, but you know what? My other person, my right-hand man is available and we want to da-da-da-da-da. It all leads to these other places. So the opportunities are there. You have to show interest, but also luck favors the prepared, right? The fact that you had your bullet points ready to go, you had some ideas, next steps, you had vision, right? You had an idea, and that is something that people can jump along and hang on to. You don't have vision, you don't have any bullet points. They go, oh, that's nice to meet you, and it's nice to hear your positive words, but we can't do anything with that. Come back when you do, right? So you were ready at the very beginning of this. That's
I have a really my friend Steve, when we talk about the college experience, he'll say like, you should really think about college as being like a really long preparation for job interviews. Like it's teaching you how to be out there in the world. Can you take advantage of that scenario? Can you accept a no? can you learn what no means? Can you accept that no is not always personal? And I think that that's very true. Some of the people that I admire most out in the field, I know Kurt. I know of Kurt's work as well. It's one of those things of like, people often get their chances when they're okay with hearing no. I think it's because they feel like, or they have faith in the idea that eventually they're going to get to yes. But if you can take it, if you can tolerate it, if you can tolerate the no and depersonalize it, you've already gained a great skill. It's already a great skill in your back pocket.
Look, Kurt Erickson says, yes, Beethoven isn't going to respond to your DMs. Neither is Stravinsky. Creatives should work together and usually want to work together, but are often afraid to even ask. So,
there was a famous string quartet that tried to channel Beethoven in a seance. So who knows?
Now that I need that story somewhere in social media. I need this is a wonderful TikTok. I need that. I need to see this. Do you, on the side note, do you have a relationship with contemporary composers? Are you a composer yourself?
No, that's the honest answer. That's the honest answer.
Okay, there you go.
But you know what I will say about that is, in my quest for empathy, one of the things that I try to do is figure out how composers do what they do or why they do what they do. And that means, sitting out and writing out parts. That means sitting down with notation software and figuring things out. That means sitting down with their scores. That means reading their liner notes. All of that work has led me into doing things like I will handle scores for composers who might trust me enough to make certain decisions for their music. And I won't say, I'm not arrogant enough to say, and in that way, I am composing. No, but I imagine that there's some sort of osmosis thing happening that connects me to their process. So I will do a lot of writing and arranging, but in terms of creating my own stuff, I have enough problems.
Well, there are definitely, for music students out there, if you're not already doing score study, it is a major part of your journey in understanding how music works, understanding why certain instruments or singers like to work with composers or like to read their music. The whole point is to master how to write for certain kinds of instrumentation, particularly the larger the instrumentation, right? So when you're listening to those recordings that your teachers keep telling you got to listen to, get a score and follow along. How does that work? How do they make these textures happen when you're listening to it? And that, I think, gives you a great deal of insight, especially for those of you who are young composers and getting started. What works? I know when I first started doing any kind of composition, my stuff looked an awful lot like the composers I was studying, right? An awful lot, a lot of emulation. And then at some point it kind of filters out and you find your own voice. But really it is about looking at scores. So, so students, I hope you're considering that. Listen, I have many more questions for you, and I'm so excited. I'm so excited about this. Before we talk a little bit more, I wanted to share a little bit more music, some more Philip Glass. We have another excerpt here, or another piece. What you've given me is behind the scenes recording Philip Glass soundtracks, Volume 2. Can you tell us about this piece that we have to share?
Sure. So in 2016, Michael Reisman and I had been touring and performing a lot by that point. And we had this big program of Philip Glass soundtracks, most things that people knew, like music from The Hours, from Dracula, Beauty and the Beast, Kundun. And at some point, they started talking about the possibility of recording, which I had not done up to that point. So this was going to be a new skill. So this clip that you're going to share is taken from some footage of my very first time going out to New York. We were at NYU, and being with the master himself, Michael Reisman, and doing the Philip Glass thing, and being along for the ride as we were actually recording the music for Candyman, which ended up becoming Michael Reisman's album Philip Glass Soundtracks Volume 2, which he had already had. It's the follow-up to his very successful album Philip Glass Soundtracks Volume 1.
Awesome. Let's take a listen to Chase Spruill. Here we go.
One more time.
My name is Chase Spruill. I'm here with the director of the Philip Glass Ensemble, Michael Reisman, and we're here in New York City at New York University in the Dolan Center, recording the music from Candyman, the suite for violin and piano.
Each take number gets a color. And then as you're listening, when you hear something bad, you make a little line on squiggle, over the spot of that color. That way you don't have to write which take it is.
Right. Awesome, intoxicating, lovely. Can you tell us a little bit about that music that we were just listening to that sort of ran underneath that?
That was the whole reason for the obsession. That is the theme from the music box of Candyman, and what eventually becomes a track called "It Was Always You, Helen." Where at the very end, spoiler alert, our heroine is sort of trapped, but by the Candyman in this big bonfire that the community builds up, and they decide they're going to trap Candyman because they think, he's done this terrible thing. They light it on fire, but she's able to foil him and get away and crawl out of the bonfire in flames.
That's right. Remember the hair.
They realize, oh no, she didn't do anything wrong. And that's the music that's happening underneath. It's not like slasher synthesized music. It's this lullaby, this kind of sing-songy piece. And at the very end of the film, you see a giant painting of her character, Helen Lyle, in graffiti, covered in flames with a crown of flowers. And you see that she's become her own legend.
I love it. I love to hear you talk about something that has been a part of your life for so long, too. It's really exciting because you know the ins and outs of it. And I'm sure that if anyone ever sat to watch the movie with you, you'd be like, okay. And then you'd be able to know.
And I would totally try to manage, the obsession because, I do operate on a limited skill set, but I try to be somewhat diverse.
I think it'd be fantastic. Listen, a whole lecture series on Candyman and the music. Come on, I'm down. I'm sure you could. Yeah, film studies. Let's get on this. Great. So, is it primarily we've talked about your career and connection to Philip Glass, but this is a very specific part of your career. You gig everywhere all the time now. So how do you manage for our students in our community when we look at you as an artist and a collaborator, et cetera? How do you create this career? You're working here, you're teaching here. What is it all that you do to fill up your time and to sort of flesh out a career in music?
That's a great question, because it is all of those things that you mentioned, and it is quite literally wall to wall in my day. Especially right now, I have an 11-year-old son, and he is like the center of my world. But around that world that facilitates our life together, I teach a tremendous amount. That really is the one job that I've had from the beginning. I started teaching when I was 12 years old, in the same time as that sort of accident. When I was healing, my parents brought in a teacher from a nearby music store, and he was giving me private lessons there until I got to the point like a year later, where I was like using crutches to go into the music store where he was. And they had these group violin classes, these group string classes happening. And I remember the owner of the store had been listening to some of the lessons, and he felt like I was making a lot of progress. He says, "You sound pretty good. We have these group classes going on, and our main teacher needs somebody to assist him. It's like go around and checking the adults and doing whatever he needs to do and work with the kids and whatever he needs." So I was like, "Oh, sure, okay, whatever." And I go in for my first day of training, and I'll never forget, his name was Dell. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm in the Air Force Reserves, and this is just something I sort of do on the side, and this is what I need you to do, and it's not so serious." And I had that one day of training on a Saturday. And they're like, "Great, see you next week." I came in next week, and they're like, "Dell got called up for service. We don't have anyone to teach. Can you just sort of, get through the class? We're looking for somebody. It's going to be, can you do that?" Like, "Oh, sure." And we got through that.
How old were you?
I was still 12, 13. I don't know. It was either exploitative or something. But literally from that day on, I was teaching. I think they realized I was cheaper than an adult. So they never found anyone. Years of teaching those group classes, they asked me to start teaching privately. I did that for years, ended up going to another store for years. And then, when I went to Sacramento State University, there was kind of a loose teaching component, working with student composers, playing in the ensemble. So there was nothing in the educational realm that felt uncomfortable to me. And this is something I often tell educators. What was important about teaching music and learning music was I could have this authentic parallel trajectory with them. I wasn't hiding anything from them. They knew that, I'm giving you this advice because this is what's working for me. It might not work for you. This is what's working for me. Is it working for you? Great. Here's what's working for me next. So it enabled me to have genuine conversation with people around music and technical stuff as well.
Organic growth of this whole thing. Very interesting.
And that's how I ended up going to Community Music Works, by the way, because I was so in the saddle working with young people and adults too, and being in the community. And
can you tell us about that program, Music Works?
Sure.
What is that program? And I mean, because you have this collaborative nature about you, and obviously there's some big moments and big arcs in your life, but this particular thing I think is something that speaks to a lot of what's happening in the world right now and how we want to move. So can you tell us a little bit about that and that experience too, as well?
Sure. So Community Music Works was founded 25 years ago. They're celebrating 25 years. And it started in the south side of Providence, Rhode Island. And it was built as a, this is around the time where, the .com era is starting to boom. And right around this time, there wasn't enough funding in underserved areas of communities to support the arts. So certain things were starting to pop up to take its place, like after school programs for young visual artists, and we had things like the YMCA and the Boy Scouts and many things, but there wasn't anything really for music, particularly for strings. So its founder, Sebastian Ruth, was interested to figure out ways to serve an unarticulated need, what he would call an unarticulated need, stating that the act of trying something artistic and musical, something that requires you to give of yourself, dedicate time, use your imagination, would be as integral a part of an educational experience as what they would do in school. And the fact that it was happening after school meant that not everybody had to go into sports. Not everybody in the South Side of Providence was going to get pulled into any sort of negative statistical thing or end up in any sort of narrow stereotypical thing, crime, gang activity, drugs, or anything like that. So it was largely an experiment to see how music education might serve as a vehicle for social justice. Over the years, they began to double down on things like a teen program, they would call phase 2, where they could get kids who had been in the program for a while to do more than just learning violin, viola, or cello. Now they would be like in groups together, having pizza on Friday night, having discussions about things they would see on the news, and creating their own shows that they could broadcast, put on for the community, and then teaching young musicians how to also go out and serve through performance, and how performance might offer you, your own voice. And it's been really exciting to see how they've evolved over the years. So when I came in, I was only supposed to be there for 1 year. I was going in to fill in for their second violinist in their quartet at the time, which was Providence String Quartet. And it ended up working out that I stayed. They were just looking at the time to figure out a way to make contemporary music a part of their curriculum. And that was something I was also very interested in. So while I was there, I helped to offer experiences in they were already working through things like creative ability development with Alice Kanak. They were doing things like improvisation and learning how to do improv games with one another, not be so tied into rigid structures for the European tradition, so-called European tradition of music education. And I started offering things like making arrangements of contemporary pieces by people like Philip, by people like Michael Nyman, minimalist people that might offer something structural in the music that kids identified with, because those structural things also happen to be involved in popular music.
Yes.
That they were very accustomed to. So we were building a culture around, these things are not separate from one another. There's actually a real connection here. Let's investigate that. Yeah. And that was my role there for almost 6 years.
Fantastic. I like there's a theme in your work and the collaborative nature, the sort of discovery, the allowing of young people, students to sort of discover in many ways, kind of like you did when you were young. You just sort of, you found your way through, and sort of being able to sort of support students in that discovery, their exploration of music is really it's wonderful. And I think that it's a kind of a way a lot more organizations are going today anyway, and sort of in their formal structures. It's sort of like, we've got this big arc, but let's leave room for students to explore and to play. And that's not always been the case, obviously, right? In so many structures, it's very much, this is the European model, and we must do this in education, and we must do this in terms of the scales, and the trajectory is this and only this.
It's scary to try and do anything else. Like, I know you do something, you do very similar things. I don't know how you've kept your beautiful head of hair. I've lost mine. So in trying to do something, but thank you, I appreciate that.
No, absolutely great. So, what's next for you? I know people are asking about your about how to find you and listen to you. You've got recordings on iTunes. Various other places we can view. I remember listening to it. There was a I don't know, it was a classical contemporary playlist, and then the first name was yours, and I was like, wow, oh look, I know that guy. So there's definitely music you can hear on iTunes, perhaps some other platforms.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Anywhere you want to search it up, Amazon. It's on Spotify, Pandora. Any place you want to Google. Thank you that you would want to support and that you would want to listen. I think that most of the pieces, most of the albums I've been able to work on have been they've come from such a fun personal place. And that's been such a pleasure to be able to do. Some of our latest things were I got to do music with the composer Brian Reitzel from the television show Hannibal, and it was like,
wow.
If I'm not careful, it's going to appear that I only do music where people are getting killed. Yeah,
childhood obsession comes back.
That you want to listen, yeah.
So what's next for you? What's going on next?
We are in the middle of planning for my first violin concerto recording. And this is one that'll happen overseas with a conductor I've been really excited to work with for a long time. With an orchestra I've been really excited to work with for a long time. And I'm not able to say too much more about that, but that's what's.
You don't know who the composer is, or
I do know who the composer is.
We cannot know.
Right.
You don't want to break any news right here on CRC Music in the studio?
I would love to. I just don't know my footing in that area. But that's what's next. And there's a second Michael Nyman album. One of the things that we did back in 2019, before the world dissolved into ashes, was this album here, Yamamoto Perpetuo, which was music written for a fashion show, and nobody died.
I don't know about that. Depends on what they wore. Okay.
Give us some time, yeah. And there'll be a follow-up album to that with a piece that was written for me during the pandemic. I worked with this composer, Michael Nyman, and he wrote me a piece for my birthday. And it was really fun because he didn't write a whole piece. He wrote like 20 measures here or there, and he would send them to me in the mail. And it's like, go to work. It's like, what do you mean go to work? He means like, put it together like an actual puzzle and figure out how we wanted it to work. Wow. And that was one of my pandemic activities. Some people were like learning to crochet and stuff. I was learning how to put together his music. That's
fascinating. I love it. I love it. This is really great because I think what's inspirational about chatting with you and your career is that we find that there are so many paths, so many ways to creating an interesting career. You are nowhere near done. You are just getting started, and so many more incredible things are coming your way. And so we're thrilled and grateful for you to be with our program today. We're pretty much done with our time, but could you do me a favor? And I always ask my guests, what do you think, so that we can speak directly to our students, what do you wish you had studied in college when you were studying that maybe you missed, or something that you did study that you say, oh my gosh, that was so important. I'm so glad that I took that. Do you have any ideas about that so that our students can maybe be thinking about how to look at the rest of their collegiate careers as they move into an official one?
All of the people I work with who I admire have an incredible intuitive sense for business. Mm-hmm. And at least my mom would say, when she wasn't trying to get me to go to dental school instead, she would say, I really wish that you had been able to take some business classes. There's a beautiful amount of there's something about trying to find your way in this that is a necessary part of the process. But if you can just have that many more tools to know how business itself works, so you know how contracts work, you know how fundraising works, development works, what it's like to work with a team of people behind the scenes to make something come out, organization. Yes. I wish that business were something more in my background. And that is something, because it's not in my background, I highly encourage you to seek out some sort of opportunity for a business class of some kind that might be relevant to you. And if you're rolling your eyes, I did that too. But I'm telling you, I think it could be really valuable, because what I wasn't able to learn in school, I did, end up learning out in the street, and I'm still learning, out there in the street, in the field.
Yes, I see you lugging your violin in the streets.
It gets real out there.
You and Michael Nyman. I love it.
Yeah. Take music about my fashion show. Go.
I love it. No, our students at CRC, we have our entrepreneurship certificates, and we have these connections to New Songs Music. We have these chances for you to learn how to sort of become an independent music instructor, etc. So, and there are business classes associated with that. So please avail yourselves of them so that you can consider how you might support your own designs moving ahead, right? What a great way to think about moving ahead. I'm going to say one last little statement, and before we let you go, Chase, I'm going to just give you a little information, audience, and then on the way out, we're going to play that epilogue once again, the first video that we shared, so we can hear it once again. There's a website there with some information about Chase. You can go and see more, hear more, read more. So please go and follow Chase Spruill, our incredible guest. Thank you so much for being with us. I got to give you a call because we got to make some things happen. Oh my goodness. Next week, we have Spring Fest on campus, ladies and gentlemen. So stop by Arts, Media, and Entertainment, our little district, our little area. We have a little amphitheater, I guess, if you want to call it, mini amphitheater, where we're going to have our quad. Thank you. That's the great word for it. Where we're going to have music and things happening there, open mic, etc. So please come check out music, theater, photography, etc. And hot dogs. There's going to be hot dogs too at lunchtime. So next week's in the studio guest is composer pianist Graham Sobelman, also from the region, on Friday, April 29th. So please come join us. Myself and Professor Kurt Erickson will host him. He's working on a lot of really cool, interesting new projects. And of course, follow us at CRC in our social media at Music at CRC. We hope to see you there to find out all kinds of different things that are coming up and about what's happening again next year. Thank you again, Chase.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, audience. And we will see you all again next week. Take care. Let's listen to that video on the way out. Bye-bye, everybody.